This episode of From the Suggestion Box was recorded prior to the implementation of recent DEAI executive orders. The views, language, and context reflect the information available at the time of the recording. The toolkit has since been updated and can still be found on the Volunteer Match website under the name Is Everyone Welcome? Tools to Broaden Volunteer Engagement. As policies and practices continue to evolve, we encourage listeners to stay informed on current regulations.
Welcome to From the Suggestion Box, navigating feedback, the good, the bad, and the say what. And I am thrilled to have my guests back. You have seen them before, Mr. Mark Hager and Miss Faiza Venzant, CVA. I am so excited to have both of you back. It's been a little over a year and a half since the last time we spoke. So it's really great to have an opportunity to catch up on what you have been doing, but I am going to turn it over to you. How about you all talk a little bit about what we're talking about today, how it started, and where we are. Faiza, would you like to start?
Cool. Thanks for having Mark and I back. And you're right, a lot has changed since then. And one big thing, let me and Mark congratulate you on your new role. Not just as podcast host, but as executive director for the Association for Leaders in Volunteer Engagement.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Nicole. Yeah, what a perfect fit. We're so excited. Obviously, I'm so biased because I'm excited that a CVA is in that role. So congratulations, Nicole.
Thank you.
So the last time we talked, Mark and I had just wrapped up a second year of the Assessing Diversity and Equity in Volunteer Inclusion project. And we talked to you a lot about a survey that we had done, focus groups that we had done, all around this idea, of the project that organizations that are attuned to inclusiveness will be more successful in recruiting a diverse base of volunteers. So we talked about a lot of the data the last time. And when we talked to you in October 2023, that's when it was, we had just kicked off a really exciting piece of this project, which is what we're here to talk to you about today. And that is the Equity in Action Toolkit. And so the toolkit is part of, and is a direct result of the findings from those surveys that we did, everything that we listened to and heard from CVAs in the focus groups. And if you're a new listener, CVA stands for Certified in Volunteer Administration. Nicole and I both have that credential. The toolkit, came out of, lots of conversations. CVAs telling us things like, we want to be more inclusive. We want to make sure that we're inviting, more diverse parts of our community to volunteer with us. We want them to feel like they belong, when they volunteer with us. We just don't know how. It's not our expertise. We wear so many hats already, and we're not necessarily experts when it comes to inclusiveness or equity. And so we don't know how. That was something that we heard. We also heard that people didn't have a ton of support. We heard things like, yeah, I have these equity goals, but I don't really know what to do with them. So, for us, the toolkit was a response to that. That's kind of where it came from. And it was put together in a really cool way. We recruited CVAs, some of whom participated in those surveys and those focus groups, some of them who didn't. And we went out and we recruited almost 24 CVAs to help us create all of these tools for the Equity in Action Toolkit. It's a free toolkit. It is available at Volunteer Match. It's free to use. Everything is downloadable and free. And all of the tools are meant to support leaders of volunteers to build practices that help them to include more people into their volunteer opportunities. And as Mark likes to say, people are getting left out of those invitations. So we're hoping that these tools help you to include more people in that invitation, but not only in the invitation, but when they come and volunteer in your organization, that people feel like they really belong. They feel truly welcomed in those spaces as well. So the toolkit talks about, even how to make your spaces accessible and welcoming and belonging, how to recruit volunteers from different communities, things to think about. So yeah, Mark, what would you add to that?
I'm just reflecting back on that first year. We got to come talk to Nicole after we spent that first year listening to the field, but I think we had an idea at that time where we were going in year two, but we didn't know from the outset there was going to be a toolkit. AmeriCorps had said, why don't you spend 3 years focused on this question of diversity and equity in volunteer spaces, and tell us what you're going to do in year one. So we really laid out that year one at listening. We learned from the survey about what organizational practices and policies look like. We heard in the focus group of what CVAs thought barriers to improving organizational practice looked like, where the problems lie. So we heard a lot, and then it fell to us to go back to AmeriCorps and say, okay, year two, what's that going to be? And I know we said at the end of that first podcast, Nicole, we'd like to come back, and it's going to be to talk about what we're going to be doing next. And that was that year two toolkit development process. So that grew out of year one. Faiza and Teresa and I had to sit down and say, what's year two going to be about? And that was just sort of a natural extension of what we heard, sort of what we were reading about and thinking. That development of some tools that some people could improve practice would be a natural step. So we have that now, and that's what we're here to chat with you about today.
Awesome. So I heard you mention Teresa. For people who are not aware of what this project is and how it all came together, she was a very pivotal part to a lot of what you all did. Do you want to just talk a little bit about what her role was?
Absolutely. Teresa's a graduate student at ASU, Arizona State University, where I'm a faculty member, and the project runs through ASU as a grant from AmeriCorps. And Teresa came on in year one as one of our graduate students who was helping collect data in the focus groups and in the survey. Came back in year two to do some spearheading of the development of the toolkit that Faiza can describe a little bit more, and is with us in year three now as we're out communicating, talking to the field as much about use of the kit and further development of the toolkit. So she's not with us here today. But she's with us on everything that we do. She's going to be out talking to the field in other kinds of podcasts, at the Elevate meeting, at Points of Light, talking about the toolkit, because that's front of mind for us today.
Awesome. She's definitely here with us in spirit. Well, that's really great, because it usually always is a team of people that is putting all of these things together. So, and I had heard that you mentioned her name, so I just wanted to, put some context behind who that person was. Okay, you said a lot of things. The first question I want to ask you both is, as you've been going through this project, what has been the most surprising discovery or the most surprising aspect of it as you were going through? So perhaps you're like, okay, well, we know we're going to gather information, we're going to get this, but was there anything that just made you go, didn't see that coming?
You asked us this at the last podcast that we did, and my answer to you then was, I remember we had a real specific discussion about, people want to tell you who they are, let them tell you who they are. And we talked about, some of the open-ended questions we asked on the survey. And it's interesting because on the second year in building the tools and the whole team that Mark and Teresa and I worked with, like these 20 plus CVAs that worked with us, one of the things that surprised me was everyone put their hand up to volunteer to be part of creating this toolkit. But there was, amongst almost all of the CVAs, personal conversations that I was having with them, a little bit of a reluctance and a little bit of, I'm not sure how to do this work, right? I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to do the wrong thing. I'm scared. I don't want to make the wrong recommendation. I don't want to recommend the wrong tool. What if I get it wrong? So it surprised me. It surprised me that there was that that fear. But it also didn't surprise me that CVAs wanted to get it right. Like they really cared about putting quality tools out there. And that's really more, I chose not to listen to the reluctance and really hear about instead how much care they had, and how much they really wanted these tools to be effective. They wanted them to support our profession. Yeah. So maybe it didn't surprise me as much. The reluctance did, but at the same time, surprised and didn't surprise me. Yeah.
Mark, how
What
about
about you, Mark?
Well, I don't know if surprised is quite the right word, but I was pleased, maybe in a surprised kind of way, how many of your colleagues, CVAs, came together to work on this particular project. You know, it's federal money coming through a university, and a real typical thing would be for professor to now start making tools and telling you how you ought to do things. Newsflash, I'm not a CVA, and I'm not responsible for organizing volunteers. So you all know a lot more about what's going on in the world and what works than I do. Certainly, it doesn't make sense for me to try to create these things. And so what we've done is we asked the field to assemble and break into groups. And what we did is we provided guidance. We provided the framework. We sort of divided the field into sort of 6 different buckets, ranging from planning a volunteer program all the way out to evaluating and recognizing volunteers at the other side. And within those 6 buckets, we had 2 to 5, 3 to 6 CVAs that joined those groups and were exuberant and reviewing, creating tools that ultimately made it into the toolkit. So not surprised really that people were willing to do that, but pleased and surprised that it came together so well that folks were willing to come and participate in that phase of the work.
And one of the things that I love is the fact that it was curated by CVAs, because it gives that foundation of, it's not just people who are willy-nilly just playing around. Like, these are people who are serious about our profession, who are invested in our profession and are looking through it through that lens. Because FYI, they don't just give out CVAs like, flyers on the street. You have to really earn that and know what you're talking about, and also just show that you are passionate about the profession and the advancement of volunteer engagement. So the fact that those are the people that you were sourcing this from really helps. For me, it lends to the credibility of the toolkit. So I want to start asking a couple of questions about the toolkit in just a moment. But Faiza, to your point where you said a lot of CVAs were reluctant and they didn't want to say the wrong thing or give the wrong advice, there's going to be people watching this who literally feel the exact same way. What advice do you have for them?
Just get started, and that's something that we've been saying over and over and over again. If we really want to move the needle in making people feel like they belong, right? And that they have agency and they have a right to participate in making their communities healthier, right? Or giving back to a community that has done something to enrich their life. Just get started wherever you're at, right? And sometimes I think when we put words like equity and diversity and inclusion onto things, it can get people's backs up. But what we're actually saying is, in this context of this toolkit, it's not necessarily about those words. It's about, what does it mean when people are left out, right? And what could it mean? What are the possibilities when people are not left out? And when we are really strategically and intentionally thinking about how to make more people feel like there's a place for them in our volunteer opportunities. And so I know your audience is a lot of volunteer engagement professionals. And so, this toolkit was created by your peers. It is for you. we are actively seeking feedback on these tools. We are, open to refining these tools. We're open to inviting new tools to include into the toolkit as well. The strength of this toolkit is the diversity of folks who we intentionally, every single person that is part of this, creating this toolkit, we approached for a very specific reason, right? It could be because of a lived experience that they had, a work experience, or multiple work experiences that they had. It's such a diverse group with a ton of lived experience, rich work experience as well. And I think it's reflected in the tools in terms of how you can take them and you can customize them and you can make them your own.
I love that. So I know if I've had the opportunity to go on to the page, it's beautifully curated. Information is easy to find. And I know if I've had the opportunity to experience the identity signs tool, I absolutely loved that tool. And actually to answer my own question that I asked you all earlier about what was surprising, going through the exercise with another group of people, and like you said, people love to share about themselves. And when we were in the room and what things that people were sharing were just things that I would have just never thought about that are so integral to people's identities, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
it's not my lived experience. So I don't think about it on a daily basis, but for them, it was. And that was the most eye-opening thing for me, especially because you could use that same tool in 3 different rooms and you're going to have 3 completely different experiences. So just since that was the one that I was the most familiar with, can you walk us through and talk a little bit about that identity signs tool?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Let me back up a little bit. So you'll find the Equity in Action Toolkit on the Volunteer Match website, and Nicole will put that in the show notes.
Yes.
When you go to the toolkit online, so fun trying to describe a web page on a podcast, but when you go to the Equity in Action Toolkit, it's organized in 3 sections, right? So the first section is planning for volunteers. So what's all the internal work you need to do to create these experiences where people feel welcome and where they belong. And then the next section is preparing volunteers, right? So these are all the different tools that help you to make sure that things like orientation and training and reflections are inclusive and welcoming as well. And then the last section is all about how do you build volunteer relationships, right? So how do you value your volunteers? How do you apply that sense of belongingness and welcoming and coaching and mentoring? And then how do you maybe rethink motivation and retention and things like that? So you'll find some tools are templates that you can fill out. Some tools are guiding questions that help you through reflection. And then some tools are actual videos or training modules. So the identity signs tool is an actual training video, and it's called Identity Signs, an exercise to encourage conversation and reflection about equity. And we'll give you the link to that specific tool in the show notes. And it's a training video that introduces you to what we call the identity signs exercise. It's such a cool tool. We use Mentimeter in the video to do it, but we also talk about how you can use the identity signs exercise in different ways. And basically what you're doing is you're asking a series of questions of the people in your group, right? So that could be a group of volunteers. It could be a mix of staff and volunteers and community members, whoever your group is. And what you're doing is you're asking them to locate themselves or self-identify depending on what the question prompt is. And there's different prompts. So one is like, the part of my identity that was the most emphasized when I was growing up is, right? And then everyone in your group tells you what that is. And the exercise really helps you to understand who's in the room, what are the identities that are present, what are some of the privileges that are present, who's not in the room, right? What voices are we not hearing from? And it's a really great exercise just to read the room. It's a great exercise to start introducing topics around belonging, accessibility, inclusion, diversity. And it's also a great exercise to help you to figure out when you're, one really cool way to use this tool is if you're using this tool with a group that has to make a decision, for example, it helps you to determine who is missing from that group, what voice or perspective is missing, and where maybe do you have too much of a bias that might be present or not. So it's a really cool activity. And like you said, Nicole, you can do this exercise over and over and over again, and the results will always change depending on who is in the room. So you can watch this video, it's a tool, and learn. You'll actually watch a group of people taking the identity signs exercise, and you'll also get some tips around how to facilitate it, how to prepare yourself for it, how to debrief or ask questions about reflection afterwards as well. So that's an example of one of the tools in the Equity in Action Toolkit.
That was a really, really great explanation. And I really encourage anybody listening to just go and participate and experience that, because I'm telling you, it's going to open up your eyes. It's going to open up your eyes. Mark, how about taking everybody through the equity practice framework?
Yeah, the equity practice framework is in that first section. I should have this in front of me, called Planning for Volunteers. And it almost could be at the very top. It's almost sort of like an organizing framework for us, the team, when we were thinking about how people should approach questions of equity and inclusion in their organizations. And as such, it's a very short and simple tool. It's one page and a second page as an example to kind of show how we imagine it being used. It came from a presentation that Teresa had seen in another meeting where folks were thinking about how do we make change in organizations? Well, first you need to assess what you are doing. What is your current practice? And so in the equity practice framework, we invite people to think about what do we do? And an example is about completion of background checks. Do you do background checks? How do you do background checks? Why do you do background checks? So first you write down your current practice and your reasons for doing it. And then you start asking yourself about who might be left out or who might feel unwelcome as a result of those kinds of practices. And that leads to a different kind of consideration called desired practices. What could we do differently in terms of, for example, background checks that would not be more excluding or cause people to stay away from our organizations. And then beyond that, a category that we call sustainable practices, about how our best practices could be ongoing and sustained within our organizations. So it's a simple tool and more of sort of an organizing framework, a way of thinking about what do we do, why might that be problematic, what could we do differently, and what would the results of that be? And that's the equity practice framework. It's a way of thinking that can be applied to any particular situation. And it can be used a couple of different ways, like all of these tools. Some of these tools are just check sheets, like a single CVA could sit down at their desk and sort of think through the questions in a particular tool and maybe get a light bulb to come on and think about, oh, I'm not doing that, or I could do that differently. But that's not most of the tools. Quite honestly, most of these tools are discussion tools. They're opportunities for teams to sit together, either a volunteer management team or a volunteer administrator sitting with other people in the organization that might not be working with volunteers to think about the various practices that are going on. What are we doing? What might be left out? Who might be left out as a result? And so for some of these, I think of it as a single person sitting at a desk. For most of them, it's teamwork, it's team building, it's sitting in a conference room with a variety of folks and going through the practice, through the various tools. And there's one in particular we might look at, Nicole. What do you think?
Yes, let's do it.
In that same section called Planning for Volunteers, currently a couple down from the Equity Practice Framework, I see it over here on my screen over here, is one that Faiza and Teresa crafted from some writing that Sue Carter-Kale had done before we had even dug into the Devi project. She was already thinking in some ways about equity work. And she published a short article, blog post called Operationalizing Inclusion in Volunteer Engagement. We saw it, we learned from it, and when it came from building tools, we went to Sue and said, can we build a tool from your thinking that you've written in your post here? She said, yeah, let's do that. Let's work on that together. And so Faiza and Teresa worked their management, and it turned into a long tool. It's 9 pages long, so it's a great discussion document for teens called Guiding Questions for Equity and Inclusion in Volunteer Engagement. And I say it's 9 pages because it's sort of like 9 different sections, or really an intro and 8 different sections, ranging from organizational readiness to planning to roles and qualifications for volunteers, engagement, and ending with evaluation. So it's broken down into various segments, aspects of work for volunteer administrators, and then it cues us to think about how people might be left out at various phases of the volunteer administration tasks. So in organizational readiness, we might consider what values are guiding our work. First, we need to be familiar with our values and all be on the same page before we think about who we might be including or leaving out from our various practices. What changes do we want to see? What gaps are we aware of or need to find out more about? When it comes to engagement, there are questions of, are there patterns in volunteer participation and retention that suggest serving with our organization is more welcoming to some volunteers than others? And unless we intentionally sit down, think about that to ourselves or discuss it within our group, it's hard to think about what different practices or better practices might look like. And this tool has many dozens of questions in those 8 different sections, just thinking about inclusion throughout the entire course of volunteer administration. Guiding questions for equity and inclusion in volunteer administration, one of the sort of more developed tools in the Equity in Action Toolkit.
You can take any of these tools, Nicole, and Nicole, you can take any of these tools and you can customize them, right? So if there's questions in that 9-page document that aren't relevant for your organization, then skip those ones, right? The tools are not prescriptive, right? So we're not saying that you have to follow these to the letter in order to be great and equitable and inclusive in what you're doing. We're just sort of suggesting and trying to get you on your way to get people out of that feeling of feeling unstuck or stuck and reluctant and not knowing where to go. So when you look at some of these documents, just take out what doesn't work for you and bring in what does work for you, right? If there's questions that are specific to your context that you want to make sure you talk about, that's great, right? That's what we're hoping that you'll do with some of these tools as well.
That's a great point.
Yeah. And I love that we are referencing them as tools. My husband is a tools guy. If I were to go in and take a picture of the amount of tools that are in my garage, and I'm just like, why do you need another one of these things?
Yes.
But one of the things that he said is that this particular tool can be used for so many different things. And there's attachments, there's things that you can, if there's a specific really fine thing that you need to get, you can add an attachment, you can take an attachment off. Sometimes it's the base for something, sometimes it works in conjunction. And so as you're saying that, I'm rehashing that tool conversation, and it's just putting this together for me in ways that I would have never expected. And I also can't ever let him hear this, because then he'll be like, yes, more tools. And I'm like, no. But in this context, absolutely. And I love, like you said, it's not prescriptive.
take it, use it as you need it, put it together with what you're needing to make it, to retrofit it for you and what your need is, because there's no one answer, there's no correct answer that's going to solve for everything, but it's having access to the various different tools. It's like our very own like Home Depot. Walk
It
in
is.
and take what you need for the project that you're working on. Um, I I do have a question, and then after this question, I want to dive into, if if we may, the inclusive volunteer recruitment guide, because recruitment is always top of mind for everybody, and it's a place that we are always, you know, if you ask, if you take just a survey, everybody's asking, what's the biggest help that you need, the biggest area where you need help? People are always going to say recruitment. And the fact that you all have a tool for that, I want to address. But before we get there, I love that you all are providing all of these tools to help really amplify, like you said, who you have in the room, but also who you don't have in the room.
Right.
And I feel like in the experiences that I've had, it was a lot easier for me to be able to identify, like, well, it's clear to me who was not in the room. So I guess it's a two-part question, because usually after that, people are like, okay, well, we identify that we don't have this voice in the room. Number one, how do we go about and getting it? But also, and I don't know if I'm asking this the right way, but does every voice have to be in the room at every time?
No, and it's okay to say that, and I'll illustrate that with a very specific tool, if I may. One of the tools is, and I'm going to say no to the answer for your question, but I want to bring it back and tie it in also to this idea of how important recruitment is, right? So one of the tools, I call it a very practical tool, is called, let me find it here on the toolkit. So it's the very first tool that you're going to see in the toolkit, and it's called A Guide for Creating Inclusive Volunteer Position Descriptions. Okay. This was created by Elizabeth Garabrandt. She's a CVA. I believe she's an Alive member as well. Elizabeth works at the Mid-Ohio Food Bank. It's one of the largest food banks in Ohio. She works in a really diverse community where there are a lot of newcomers to her area, and many languages are spoken, and food insecurity is, part of the mission of her organization. So Elizabeth has been thinking about inclusive recruitment because she has to. That's the community that her organization's in. And she was the chief architect of this guide for creating inclusive volunteer position descriptions. I love this tool because it's the perfect example of the spirit of this toolkit, which is, it's not meant for you to rewrite everything that you do. Volunteer engagement professionals, Nicole, you and I know this, and Mark knows it as well through all the work that he's done with CCVA. Volunteer engagement professionals are incredibly resourceful, incredibly accomplished, are already doing a lot of amazing things. And if you're a CVA, you've already demonstrated your experience and your knowledge in a lot of areas as well. I want people to look at this toolkit starting from that position of strength and confidence in their abilities.
Ooh,
so these tools
I'm sorry, hold on.
Yeah.
Can you say that again? I want people to hear that.
Oh, okay.
Because often people will come at this from like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. Oh, I don't. But I love what you just said. So can you please repeat that?
So I want people who are going to use this toolkit to approach it from a place of feeling confident in their abilities and feeling strong in their competencies, right? And so these tools are meant to enhance what you're already doing, right? So if you're already, so say you're feeling stuck, okay? I know that I want to include more people in the invitation to volunteer. I want them to feel welcome when they come. I just don't know how to do that. Maybe you're not ready to use one of the more strategic tools. Maybe you don't have a team to work with, but surely you have volunteer position descriptions, right? That's what you use to recruit folks. So how can you just enhance those position descriptions? So I love this tool that Elizabeth created, a guide for creating inclusive volunteer position descriptions, because it takes you through the first page of the tool describes what it is, and how and why a position description can be used in a way that it's asking the volunteer, it's creating something so that a volunteer can read it and can get a sense of what is this experience going to be like for me sensorially, physically, what's going to be required of me, and really helping the volunteer to picture themselves in the role, right? Versus just reading what does the organization need, right? It's thinking about it from the perspective of the volunteer. So the first page talks about that. The second page talks about what are all the elements that make a position description more inclusive. So that's talking about things like, it's not just about this is the role, this is how it connects to the mission, this is when we need you. It's also talking about things like, here are the physical demands that we're going to need, right, when it comes to this role. Are you going to be lifting? Are you going to be standing? Do you need to move things, right? This is what the work environment's going to look like. Is there going to be a loud fan overhead, right? Are there funny smells in the space? So when you ask the question, does everybody need to be included all the time? The answer is no. And your position description is the perfect way for you to be really specific about who's going to succeed in this role, who can see themselves in this role. And also it's also going to, I don't want to say weed out, because that's not the intent of it, but it's going to, if somebody's reading it and there's parts of it that don't resonate with them, they're not going to apply to that role, right? They're going to find a role that works for them. What's also great about this tool is that the third page of the tool, Elizabeth provides an example of what an inclusive position description looks like. It's for a pantry volunteer. And when you read that position description, you can kind of get a feel for what it's actually going to feel like to work in that space, right? In terms of the noises, who's going to be there, how many people, are they going to be the same people, are they going to be different people? And I also like that it's really specific. It's only available, this role is only available on these days at this time. It's available to anybody, and we'll make it work for your schedule. It's okay for you to be really specific. And sometimes when we want to be welcoming and we want to be inclusive, we also have to be realistic, right? Some of the roles that we offer are not going to work for people who work 9 to 5 if they're only offered 9 to 5, right? Some of the roles are not going to be roles that are going to be available for people if they have physical limitations, right? Some roles are not going to be ideal for somebody that has a different way of processing the world in a sensory way. And it's okay for us to be really honest about that. So that's an example of how you use the tool like that to recruit not just more, but the right individuals into your organization.
I really, 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 really like that for so many reasons. What you just said, it reminds me of that marketing adage that if you're talking to everyone, you're talking to no one. And by making the description specific, it really enhances, because I personally believe that everybody has a purpose, a skill, a way to uniquely offer good into this world. And when it is that specific, you help to find those, right? And so like you said, it's not necessarily weeding out, but it's enhancing that. And it helps somebody to realize maybe that's not for me. It can guide me to where something else is better for me with a better, and I'll have a better experience because of it. Because, and it's like, and it's things like you said, I love the sensory aspect. There's things that you don't necessarily think about where, if I'm the type of person who's cold all the time and the description neglected to mention that, wherever this opportunity is, it's going to be like 45 degrees
all the time, that would have been something I would have liked to have known. And it's also going to
Absolutely.
keep down that the attrition rate, because you don't have a whole bunch of people signing up for stuff without unclear expectations. And I love how it does that in that role. I know at one position we did something like that, and for a greeter, it was must be able to stand and welcome people as they come in. And we thought about it and we are like, but do you have to stand? Or is it, do you have to have a welcoming personality? Do you have to greet people? Like, is it something that you absolutely have to stand to do? Or could a chair be provided? Could somebody who uses a wheelchair do it? And after giving it thought and thinking through that lens, we made some adjustments. But it was going through and asking those questions. So that explanation really resonated with me. So just like you said, it really ties into that recruitment, and that's one aspect of it. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how that specific inclusive volunteer recruitment guide really can expand on that?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to also use it as an opportunity just to talk about how each of these tools has its own really cool origin story, right? And so the Inclusive Volunteer Recruitment Guide, it kind of came to be because when we went through the phases of creating the toolkit, we had a phase where all of the groups had a theme, or it was basically like a competency in the work that we do that they were focused on researching tools around. So during that research phase, Ashley, who is a manager of volunteers at a children's hospital in Toronto, Canada, she found out about something called the Inclusive Recruitment Toolkit, which was part of the West Yorkshire Health and Care Partnership. And she loved the way that it was set up and was like, hey, could we use this model somehow in terms of creating an inclusive volunteer recruitment guide? So one of the things that was really cool about this process is that there were existing tools out there that we were able to modify to make them work for our context. So this is one of them. The Inclusive Volunteer Recruitment Guide is basically taking you through every stage of the volunteer recruitment process, which you already have. So again, it's meant to help you enhance what you're already doing. And it's just asking you to consider some questions, right? And the whole purpose of this is that if you look at your current practices and just ask yourself a couple questions along the way, does it help you to identify if there are some barriers that exist, and does it help you identify, like, and dream a little bit about what a desired practice could be? So you use this guide and you look at those three things. What is your current practice? What are the barriers? And what's your desired practice? And it takes you through all these different stages. So for example, the planning and preparation stage, the marketing stage of volunteer recruitment, the screening stage of volunteer recruitment. What do you do in the interviewing stage of volunteer recruitment? And then what happens when you actually invite a volunteer to participate? So let me give you an example. So for example, in the interviewing stage, what this guide does is it brings up some issues for you. You already have an interview process. You already have an interview template. You already have a way that you do interviews. Great. Start there. Okay. So take a minute and look at the issues that are presented. It's not an exhaustive list. It's just a guide to get you thinking, and ask yourself, okay, when it comes to the hiring team, does the hiring team that does the interviewing, do they have the skills to manage an inclusive and equitable interview process, right? Have they gotten any training on that? So you would think about that question. You would list what's your current practice, right? And then you would say, here's what we currently do. You would say, what are some of the barriers when it comes to thinking about this question? And then you would tell yourself, okay, well, what's the desired practice, right? So what would I wish to see when it comes to who our hiring team is? Or before somebody sits down to interview a volunteer, what's some of the training that they might need, some of the support that they might need? It asks things like, Are interviews offered in multiple formats, in multiple times of the day? Is that something you've even considered, right? And you might write in your current practice, yep, we're already doing this, right? There are no barriers. We're already doing this. The desired practice, we're already there. Great. Some of these tools also help to validate some of the things you're already doing really well when it comes to equity. Sometimes it's nice to see that as well, but it's also nice, for things to be pointed out that you just maybe hadn't thought of. And it's not that you're doing something wrong. It's that, what's that Maya Angelou quote? When you know better, you do better. Sometimes it's just that you don't know, right? That there's other things to consider, because it's just never come up. It's just never been a part of what you do. So the Inclusive Volunteer Recruitment Guide has these guiding questions. It asks you to reflect on what you're currently doing. What might some of the barriers be to getting to what a desired practice is? So it's a really strong guide. There's a blank page at the end for you to surface some of your own issues that might be specific to your context. So think about if you work in, I'll say hospital environment, for example. Maybe there's legislation or insurance that is an issue for you. Use the blank page there to write down what's specific to your context, and then help you take you through your current practice, your barriers, and then your desired practice as well.
I love it. Man, we could talk about this for the next 2 hours. We totally could. We might have to have you back a third time.
We could, but Nicole, I have to pick up my kids from school.
Yes.
Parental neglect. We don't want to be talking about that the next time we meet.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So, I want to thank you all so much, because the biggest thing I think that I've taken from this is to not be afraid, is to move forward. We will make mistakes, but learn from the mistakes, and don't let the fear of making the mistake keep you from moving forward. I want to thank you both so much for joining us. And in 30 seconds or less, for each of you, what are the last things that you would like to leave for our listeners?
I think it's important for us to say that this is a work in progress. It's not like it's up there and it's done. It's a first cut that we were able to do from a process that we instituted last year, but we never meant for it to be the finished product. We've got a whole year here where we can continue to listen. We want to get this out in front of the field, free to everyone to look at and to use and to give comments on. We want to hear feedback. In fact, we're going to be talking with a variety of cases this coming year about their experience with the tools. Ask them what can change, what we can do better, and make adjustments to these tools. We want to add new tools. Could be things that grow out of these conversations that we have, or it could be somebody just shows up and says, "Hey, this tool that think is important isn't in your toolkit," and we're going to say, "Well, then let's develop that together and add it." So we want to keep adding it over the coming year to make it as vibrant and useful a toolkit as possible.
Wonderful. Faiza?
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for having us back a second time and for being as excited about us on this. I mean, who thought you'd ever get excited about a toolkit? But I'm fired up about it. And so thank you for being fired up about it as well. It's really simple. And what I would say is, and it's what we've been saying all along, it came from Mark, people are getting left out. Start today. You absolutely have it within your power and your knowledge and your competence to get started in small ways, big ways. That toolkit will help you. And please don't hesitate to reach out to us if there's anything that we can do to just support you in getting started. We're happy to do that as well. And you also have this whole group of CVAs that created these tools that's also looking for feedback and are happy to connect with you as well in terms of how you operationalize and interact with these tools as well. So people are getting left out. Get started today.
Yes, get started today. Connect. Thank you all so much for tuning in for this episode of From the Suggestion Box, navigating feedback, the good, the bad, and the say what? I already have an idea of how I'm going to bring you all back. Make sure to click like, subscribe, share this episode, share the toolkit. We're going to be here for you. See you next time. Bye-bye.